What's up, Scyushi Squad? We are back in more Trove, and today we're going to be talking about the Solarion. This is the new class being added to Trove. Yes, it's a stupid name, but it's not a stupid class. It's actually pretty darn cool. Now, well, pretty darn hot, dare I say, because it's a fire-based class, which I like fire, but I'm not the biggest fan of this class so far. Generally speaking, there's not really anything about it that particularly excites me, and the kit of this class is based off of damage over time, or DOT, as we're going to be referring to it for the rest of the video. Now, we are going to end up touching upon all of the different abilities of this class. This is kind of going to end up being the deep dive that those of you who have been patiently waiting for, because you keep asking me on stream, and I get it, okay, but this is why this video exists, is so that I don't have to keep repeating myself whenever we're on stream. But anyways, we're going to end up having a separate video that's going to go into more detail of how you'll obtain the class, just because it can end up being pretty daunting. Most of all, crafting this class, the short answer is that it's out of the question, and I would recommend that you just end up buying one of the packs. And even as a free-to-play, I'd recommend that you grind credit pouches in order to end up getting the character. But again, we'll have another video that'll go into more detail of actually obtaining it. Today, we're going to be focusing on the abilities of the class itself. So, the Solarians, as servants of the Sun Goddess, work together with their Phoenix in order to distribute damage over time effects and deal out physical damage. Solarians use bows to shoot their enemies, while the Phoenix rushes in to melee and you know, it's a physical, up close and personal enemy that it's going to end up attacking. Blah, 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 blah. Let's never mind all of this stuff, and let's just get into the actual abilities of the class itself. So there is the passive ability of the class, which is the Phoenix Radiance. So the Solarion gains Divine Radiance and energy from their damage over time effects. Okay, so from the dots. Divine Radiance increases the number of projectiles fired from your basic attacks. So that is actually this ugly thing that you see on the bottom of our screen right here that looks like it was made in MS Paint. You can see we've got one of them lit up right now and none of the other ones. So if I actually, I was actually trying to show you guys the new biome here, which just has a sky section and then a bottom section, but I'm actually not strong enough to handle this area on this guy because I have all of my gear still on my Shadow Hunter because I'm testing things. But let's go in here so I can end up showing you this. Okay, actually, sorry guys, the test server is just so laggy right now. The game is literally unplayable. Like, we're rubber banding everywhere and our hits don't get detected by enemies. So we're just gonna be using training dummies for today's video just so I can show you guys. So the Phoenix actually has a damage over time, or a dot, that's going on this training dummy right here. And as the dot is actually going on, we're actually gaining that Divine Radiance that it mentioned, which is slowly filling up these weird JPEG feathers down here, right? So it starts at 1, then it moves out to 3, and then 4, 5, 6, 7. And what that does by having it fully maxed out is it will actually give you a spread shot. Now, unfortunately, even though the spread shot seems like it would actually be something really, really cool because you would be able to essentially shotgun the enemy, right? But it doesn't seem like that's the case. It seems like only a few of the attacks end up actually registering rather than all of them, which I find a little bit weird. But anyways, let's move on, because the other aspect is the fact that energy is going to be generated by using these dot abilities as well, because the class doesn't actually benefit from energy regen, specifically because it's going to end up using its abilities to regenerate energy, which is very strange. But energy is used to power the Prismatic Blast, which is the ultimate ability of the class. The Solarion summons a Phoenix to aid them in battle. The Phoenix attacks apply a damage over time effect that deals 250% damage over the course of 5 seconds. Additionally, granting Divine Radiance and energy back to the Solarion. So that's just the Phoenix on its own. When the Phoenix dies, it will spawn an egg at its location, and the egg itself will heal over time. Like, it just sits there static. It doesn't move with you or anything, which is kind of dumb. It just slowly heals itself, similar to a Chloromancer's plant. And then once it ends up gaining full health, it'll end up respawning and having a damage over time effect of an explosion towards enemies that are nearby. There is also your number 1 ability, will end up making the egg heal faster or hatch faster, right? But anyways, moving on to the base attack of the class. So the Solarian sends out a shot from their bow, dealing 175% damage to enemies in front of them, and any of the Solarian's damage over time effects are refreshed. So while this dot that the Phoenix is actually putting on this enemy only lasts for 5 seconds, if we continually tag this enemy, it's actually refreshing that dot if the Phoenix would end up moving on to another target, which is very interesting, and again will work in tandem with the ultimate. Everything about this class is actually hand built around the ultimate ability, at least I would think so. So then there's going to end up being the primary ability, which is your right click, Solar Flare. So the Solarian fires a charged explosive shot that increases area of effect the longer it's being held, so the longer it's charged. Literally, it's the old Shadowhunter's right click ability. I knew they would rehash it for something, right? But anyways, that's going to end up being the fully charged shot, which does deal damage to a larger radius versus just a tap. Just does a very small radius and doesn't do that much. So it will apply a damage over time effect of 250% damage over the course of 5 seconds. It will also grant Divine Radiance, again, you know, the thing on the bottom of our screen, and energy back to the Solarian. The Solarian will also be granted Slow Fall while the ability is active for a short time afterwards. So the Phoenix will also target enemies that are attacked by the Solar Flare. So if I actually right click on this training dummy, our Phoenix is going to end up moving over there. He's very, very jank. But you'll notice that we've got these glowing effects on our character, and we got slow fall for a little while, which is very, very janky and doesn't seem to work all the time. But either way, that's going to be really, really nice for fast, speed farming classes, because you'll essentially be able to juggle yourself so long as the hit detection actually works. But you can keep yourself in the air, which does give you a lot of survivability. But as you can see, the abilities just in Trove are very, very jank, so it's almost impossible to end up keeping it up. If servers aren't lagging, okay, sure, you could potentially end up juggling yourself in the air almost indefinitely, so long as you ended up having a high enough amount of jump value to your class, which again gives you more survivability because you're avoiding enemy attacks. Whatever. Anyways, moving on to the secondary ability, which is going to end up being your number 1. So this will summon a pillar of light at the targeted location that expands over time and deals 100% damage to enemies, and does a 250% damage dot over the course of 5 seconds. The area will also heal friendly targets, and the damage over time. Okay, oddly enough, there's a lot of spelling errors, and it kind of repeats itself multiple times in the patch notes. But anyways, it also mentions that if a Phoenix is in an egg, this will cause the egg to explode faster. The ability can also be cast in rapid succession up to 3 times at once. As you can see down here, we've got a little number 3. So if I use one of the abilities, it used a charge, and now it's slowly regenerating. So we can actually throw down 3 of these in an area, and you can see that it is going to end up stacking, albeit not very well, just because of how the ability works and just how Trove works in general. It's very weird, but you can see the video effects on top of the creature are actually the different dots. So it's kind of a way that you're supposed to be able to keep track of all of them and have them all applied at once, and that's where a lot of the damage is going to come from with this character. But more specifically, it's going to be focused on the ultimate ability, so the Prismatic Blast. This takes energy in order to use, so it creates a blast of energy continuously, dealing 400% damage to enemies in an area around the Solarian. Each blast costs energy, using your ult costs the energy, but it gives the Solarian a damage buff that can stack up to 5 times. This buff lasts until Prismatic Blast ends or toggles off once energy is depleted. So basically the ability is going to end up lasting so long as you have energy. And so what you would essentially end up doing is, if you end up having full energy and full Divine Radiance, you would essentially end up using your ult, and then you start spamming all of your abilities, because by having all of your dots on at a time, you're actually regenerating energy very, very quickly until the dots end up wearing out, which ultimately is going to end up draining your ultimate ability. So the point that I'm getting at is, as you have all of your dots on enemies and you're using your base attack to keep them all refreshed, you will actually be able to stay in your ultimate ability for much longer. And again, you can actually spam this ability quite often. So whatever enemy that you're fighting as a single target is going to end up feeling the hurt from this, because you can see all we got to do is just wait for our energy to recharge, and then we can just use our ult again. Now, the initial cost of casting the ult is going to be a significant chunk of energy, and then slowly generate energy, or slowly take away your energy from that point on. But again, if you're just spamming your abilities, you can essentially just use your ult almost all the time, just non-stop, which is really, really cool and really, really weird. You know, like it's such a strange class, but I kind of like it. Now, that would essentially be the gameplay loop of the character, is you're building everything for your ult and then you're just popping it off all the time. Oddly enough, just the mechanics of this character really remind me of something that you might see in Diablo. But anyways, let's move on to the subclass ability of the character, and then we'll talk about the hidden ring effects on crystal rings. So the subclass ability of the class is going to end up being, it makes it so that your basic attack on whatever character you have it as a subclass ability has a 5% chance to cause an explosion, dealing 100% damage that applies a dot effect on enemies, which will deal 50% damage over the course of 5 seconds. Damage done by this effect restores energy to the user. So this subclass ability is insanely useful on classes that end up having a consistent attack. So Tomb Raider, Draco, Shadowhunter, classes like that are really going to see the benefit of this ability, because basically every time you end up tagging an enemy with your base attack, it's a 5% chance, 5% chance, 5% chance, and it's just going to end up slowly being more and more and more viable on these classes that end up having a rapid fire versus a character that would end up attacking a lot slower. Not to say that it would end up being improbable to end up using this subclass ability on other classes, but generally speaking, you would want to keep it on the rapid fire characters. Now, the examples that I gave you of the 5% chance and the 100% damage with the 50% damage dot is actually 0 to 5,000 power rank, but let's skip all the way to the end. If you can manage to have 40,000 power rank on your Solarion, because yes, that's possible now, the basic attacks have a 10% chance to deal 350% damage, and the dot is going to be 100% damage. So significantly stronger than having it at low power rank. Probably one of the only subclass abilities that you would really want to level your character up for. Now, the other ability of the subclass, if this game was not such a lag fest, is that it is going to also give you light value. Now, the way that subclass abilities work is the passive ability that we just talked about is going to end up being based off of the power rank of the existing class, whereas the substat you get, in this case the light value, is going to be tied to the class's level. So if we have the class at level 30, this light value would end up increasing slightly. But generally speaking, having the extra light is going to end up making quite a bit of a difference, and some characters might end up just benefiting from having that extra light value, even if the ability itself is a bit superfluous. So now let's move on to the hidden ring effects, and then lastly I'll end up talking about where I think this character is going to fit in terms of Trove's architecture and end game. There's going to end up being, of course, the 3 different hidden ring effects. 3, Mario, and Luigi Mario. Dumb joke that I keep with the channel for years. So guiding flight is going to end up making it so that your Prismatic Blast, your ultimate ability, and guiding light will now also apply the Solar Ring's slow fall effect. That would probably be an ability that you want to get if you're trying to use this character for farming dungeons, and more specifically speed farming, because the slow fall effect is going to end up being quite useful in a lot of different areas. And more specifically, this new biome specifically has a debuff that will actually make you fall faster, and so having slow fall on this character is going to kind of compensate for that, because the fast falling actually works with your wings and ends up just being a very, very annoying effect. So having the slow fall to kind of negate that, not that I can actually see any enemies around here, is ultimately going to end up being very, very useful for this class specifically to grind this specific biome, which I find ironic because you need to grind this biome in order to end up getting the items in order to end up crafting this class in the first place. But we already seem to have the slow fall effect. That's funny because I didn't tag anything. Weird. I don't know. The game's really, really laggy. But anyways, it does make a substantial difference to end up having that slow fall, just because you could travel from here to here, as opposed to if you pull out your wings and we end up getting the debuff, if it is stop being a lag fest. Oh, wait a minute. You know what? I wonder whether or not, I think it might be these wings. Fly like a phoenix, Solarion will carry you until you are free. I wonder if these wings end up getting, yeah, they get rid of the debuff. Oh, okay. I didn't know that. So these wings are part of one of the Solarion class packs. So this is what normal wings is going to end up looking like, which is descending a lot faster than it does in normal areas. So just to put that into perspective for you guys, that the slow fall has that functionality. Anyways, moving on to the other ring effect is going to be Solar Stance. So this will remove the Solar Wings effect entirely, but now it will apply a damage reduction buff for a short period of time instead. Frankly speaking, I wish that they would explain what the actual percentage is of the damage reduction, because frankly speaking, I think that that's probably going to be an absolutely useless ability. And then the Prismatic Chain, this is probably going to be your best option if you don't want to go for the slow fall, which is Prismatic Blast, your ultimate, causes enemies damaged by it to also fire off an additional Prismatic Blast, which will damage nearby enemies. So that's the one that's just for damage and for clearing dungeons, because it's going to end up dealing with a whole group of enemies. Now, lastly, let's talk about where we think this character is going to end up fitting in Trove. Frankly speaking, I think that this is going to end up being an all-around good class. I don't have the experience of playing it at the end game yet, because obviously I'm still in the process of upgrading some of my gems and testing some stuff out. And generally speaking, I don't have the class at level 30 as the time that I'm recording this video. But based on my limited experience with the class, and based on the explanation of the hidden ring effect more specifically, and the fact that you're going to end up spamming your ultimate ability on this character, I feel like the ultimate ability is going to end up being the bread and butter of the class. You basically will want to try and keep your dots going at all times so that you're constantly regenerating energy, so that when you get to the next dungeon, you can end up using your ultimate, and then that explosion effect will more than likely end up dealing such heaps amounts of damage that it will end up defeating all of the enemies around. And on top of that, you could just end up spamming your other abilities as well, obviously. Now excuse me. The cooldown on these abilities is pretty bad, which means that you will benefit from having a cooldown ally and maybe even using a cooldown emblem. I don't know, it's entirely up to you, but generally speaking, I do not think that this class is going to end up being too great for speed farming per se, because the way that speed farming works is there's two factors. One is the speed with which you can travel from one dungeon to another, which I feel this class suffers from, and then the next is going to end up being the time to kill. How fast can you end up clearing the dungeon? How fast can you pop out your abilities and just do devastating amounts of damage, which I think the Solarion is going to end up doing fine in that regard. But what I'm very curious to see is, because of the fact that this character is so heavily reliant on damage over time effects, I wonder how it's going to end up handling the delves, and more specifically bosses. I don't know whether or not this class is going to end up being very beneficial for Leviathans, because unfortunately the ultimate ability, though cool, kind of works completely opposite to how it should with this character, because I personally think that your ultimate ability should be tied to your Phoenix rather than being tied to your main character, because unfortunately if you use your ultimate ability, it means that you gotta get in striking distance, you gotta get in melee length from the enemy that you're fighting, which kind of sucks, because it means that if you're fighting a Leviathan, for example, like that's the last thing you want to end up doing as a ranged class in the game, is get up close and personal, especially when you've got the advantage of slow fall to end up keeping you alive, right? So I don't know, that's my 2 cents towards it, but generally speaking, again, I think the class is going to end up handling delves particularly well, and generally speaking is going to end up being what do you call it? Jack of all trades, master of none. I don't know if it's going to end up shining in any specific category, but I do feel that it does have its place in Trove. Now, as far as my own personal opinions on the class, I could take it or leave it. I'm not that big into damage over time classes, and the abilities themselves I feel are a little bit underwhelming. you know, especially with the right click being the projectile shot from the Shadow Hunter and the left click being this spread shot that doesn't really function as well as it should, just because it's kind of like, oh great, here we go with another character that's going to suffer from projectile detection. That's my thoughts towards it, and frankly speaking, why I would more than likely just stick with the Shadow Hunter if it was up to me. And why, as of right now, I'm still going to end up working on my Shadow Hunter and trying to get it stronger. And then, you know, then I'll end up swapping my gems over to the Solarion and so on and so forth. Anyways, thanks for watching. Smash like, sub for more, buy the merch you want to support the channel, and have a wonderful day, ladies and gentlemen.